Great, thanks. So it's wonderful to be here. I think this is my first ever talk for the Vienna Taiwan Center, and I think it's my second Vienna University talk. My last one was at least 10 years ago. I think we're still not totally sure. Um, I'm really glad to have this opportunity to talk about the 1990s, which is a period that is very close to my heart. I lived in Taiwan for most of the 1990s, first as a language student and then as a language school teacher. And my most recent book, which came out in December 2025, also looks at the 1990s, but it's about Taiwan's railway history. So, which I spoke about in Bratislava last Friday. So today, then, why look at the 1996 presidential election? Well, firstly, it's a real critical moment in Taiwan's modern political history. It's the moment that most international organizations see Taiwan as becoming a full democracy. So Freedom House, for example, classifies that as the key turning point. Often in class at my university, we often have debates about what is the moment when Taiwan becomes a democracy. And perhaps the most common answer is 1996. And this is why this election is covered quite significantly in Shelley Rieger's influential book, Politics in Taiwan, Voting for Democracy. But another reason that we remember this election is because of the atmosphere that was going on in Taiwan at this point in time. So Taiwan was in the shadow of Chinese military exercises from the summer of 1995 through to the spring of 1996. So it was also a key moment in cross-strait relations between China and Taiwan. And these military exercises were designed to influence these elections that were going on in Taiwan, to try and avoid the least preferred Taiwanese leaders winning these elections, and to send a warning that Taiwan was crossing certain Chinese red lines. Now, when we look back to the presidential elections of 1996, there's a common perception that relations with China were the key issue, that they overshadowed all other issues. But to what extent was that the case? This is something, and this is another reason why I was really glad to have this opportunity to talk about this election. For my PhD and my first book, Party Politics in Taiwan, I looked at election advertising from 1991 to 2001. And one of my key data sets was newspaper election ads. So this morning I had a chance to kind of look back to see what I'd written about the newspaper election ads in my first book that came out in 2005. And the newspaper election ads tell us that this was the number one issue. It was unification versus independence, the China threat. While a lot of the domestic issues were almost disappeared. For example, when we look back to the 1990s, the most stressed issues were not actually China for the whole decade. It was political corruption, social welfare. But in 1996, in the newspaper election ads, these domestic issues were almost invisible, according to the newspaper data. The other thing that the newspaper ad data showed was that the parties were not so polarized. In other words, the parties were moving towards a more moderate position. Even at this point in time, there's three big parties in Taiwan: the Democratic Progressive Party, the KMT, or the Kuomintang, and a third party was called the New Party. But according to the newspaper data, they're relatively moderate. Okay, Here we have um, the four presidential candidates in the election of 1996. We have the winner, Li Gonghui from the Kuomintang, who gets 54% of the vote. The second place candidate from the Democratic Progressive Party, Po Mingmin, who got about, I think, 21%. Then the third place and the fourth place candidates were both KMT defectors. In other words, they were rebel candidates who split away from the KMT. They weren't endorsed. So in the case of Lin Yangang, he was supported by the new party, but was officially an independent candidate. And the same applies to Chen Yuan, who was a former government minister, who again had split away from the ruling KMT. So in this election, if we add up the official KMT candidate plus the two KMT rebel candidates, they get about 80% of the vote, while the official opposition party candidate gets just over 20% of the vote. Oh yeah, I can see that the vote share is slightly blocked there, but we have this on another slide. So what I'm going to talk about today is how did these four sets of candidates address the China issue in their TV advertising? So would that be the same as the newspaper ad data? And what I'm also going to try and do, if I control my time well enough, is to talk briefly about um, tw 28 years later, in the most recent election, how have the parties changed in the way they deal with China? So our most recent election is 2024. So I do have some slides on the 2024 election. So we compare then and now. Okay, so another question to think, kind of methodological question to think about is why actually look at TV ads? And I think there's a couple of reasons. Well, firstly, in Taiwan's elections from about 1996 through until quite recently, TV election ads are the biggest single spending item in the campaign. Taiwan starts off with a very controlled advertising environment. In other words, in the first elections in 1991, 1992, parties couldn't buy ads. But 1995, 1996 are the first years when political parties could basically buy as much advertising time as the TV stations could supply. So it was a little bit like a US model of political communication. And this was a kind of real turning point in political communication, particularly with the rise of cable TV. So Taiwan also liberalizes cable TV in the mid 1990s. So it's a quite chaotic atmosphere. In other words, every channel is selling advertising space, even the cartoon channels for children at this point in time. So a lot of money was being spent. Okay, here we've got the figures again for the votes and vote shares. So here you can see that the KMT's lead, their way wins with 54%, followed by the DPP with 21%, Liangang with almost 15%, and Chen Yuan. So the third and fourth places are the two KMT rebel candidates. So based on the vote share, who would you think was the biggest spender in this election for TV advertising? Most people would expect it's the KMT. The KMT at this point in time is often called the richest party in the world. It has huge financial assets that it accumulated after being in power for 4 decades. But take a look at the campaign spending figures. In fact, it was the fourth place candidate that spends the most on TV ads, with Chen Yuan and Wang Qingfeng spent 90 million Taiwan dollars, followed by the KMT 55, DP's 34 million, and the lowest spending was the third place candidates, Lin Yagang and Hao Bo-chun, who was supported by um, the new party. So I think it shows that spending doesn't necessarily translate into winning votes. Okay, now we come to the content of these ads in 1996. One of the things that surprised me when I was looking at these, I should say that the last time I looked at some of these ads was probably 20 years ago when I was doing my my PhD. And so the first thing I found was that China and the China threat were actually much less visible than I'd expected, much less visible than the international media at that point in time. Back in 96, I was living in Taiwan, and I still remember my parents telling me, this is really dangerous. You should think about coming back. At this point in time, some members of the European Green Party Federation were talking about coming to Taiwan to support the brand just newly created Green Party. And one member did come, but another one cancelled because of concerns of safety. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the newspaper ad data suggested that there was a big focus on the China threat, but it was much less stressed than I expected. Okay, let me now then take you through what were the key appeals of the four candidates, and I'll particularly talk about the way that they dealt with the China issue. So firstly, we've got the winning candidate, Li Denghui. In the case of Li Denghui, so we have a lot of focus on Li's personality. So we have a number of ads where we see Li Denghui sitting in an armchair, talking about a range of topics. He talks about how he fell in love. He talks about some of the challenges he found going abroad because of restrictions on where he could travel. For example, he talks about being on the plane when they arrive in Hawaii, and he can't get off the plane. He talked about how he quit smoking. So it's really kind of very, very personal. And this is Li Denghui's first election. He'd never, previously in his government positions, he'd always been appointed. For example, Taipei mayor in the 1980s was a appointed position. It was only in 1994 that it was directly elected. But he adjusts very well to this kind of modern style of political communication. We also see a lot of ads that are endorsing Li Denghui. We have cultural figures like the opera singer Yang Lihua talking about her appreciation of Li. We also have kind of ordinary people, farmers like we have here, fishermen, talking about how they appreciate what he's done for Taiwan in his last 7 years as the unelected president. And we also have KMT advertisements that talk about how the KMT delivered democracy to Taiwan. So they're arguing that the Taiwanese population should be grateful for what we've achieved in terms of democratization, which is quite annoying to many of the opposition figures who argue that the KMT had blocked democracy for multiple decades. But the KMT issues a lot of ads with this message of that we've delivered democracy. Okay, what about China? Actually, the KMT had very few ads that directly deal with the China threat in this election. I was really quite surprised by this because we have stereotype or an image of Li Donghui being very strong against the China threats. The Chinese military exercises are really targeting Li Donghui, but this was one of the few exceptions. This is from a very, very short ad just before the election. And the slogan here is democratic unity versus the missile exercises, and then use your votes use your votes to express our voices, and then lead away. So it's one of these kind of 10-second ads, maybe a day or two before the election. Rather than mentioning China, one of the things that the KMT does is to talk about how under Li Donghui, Taiwan has expanded its international space. And this is relevant because Taiwan has, Li Donghui has visited the United States in the summer of 1995 that the PRC, China, uses to justify these military exercises. So it's an indirect reference. So in one of these ads, this ad was quite an interesting one, that it's disguised as a news report, but in reality, it's a election ad. So this is the fake news broadcaster, and she's reporting on Lee's visit to the United States and Cornell University in June of 1995. In the clip, we hear Li Donghui speaking in English, talking about how the Republic of China is determined to play a peaceful and constructive role in the international community, which is basically what is kind of driving China crazy by Li. And then in the latter part of the ad, we see Li appearing on the front page of Time magazine, Li in the United States. Unofficial but historic, his visit underlines Taiwan's rising global importance. And the KMT has a number of ads that really are trumpeting their success at breaking through this kind of international isolation. And back in 2001, one of my favorite interviews when I was doing my PhD was to interview Li Donghui. And I was very nervous. And actually, I only got a few quotes into the book. But this quote, I think, was quite interesting. He made the point that though the official name was the ROC, later I began to use the phrase ROC on Taiwan. Later it became Taiwan ROC to give it a more local flavor. But he also notes that there's no meaning in talking of Taiwan independence. We've already established something new here. So for Li Donghui, we can see why some people would see Li Donghui as a pro-independence politician. But this really depends on our definition of what actually counts as pro-independence. So clearly you can see that he's not a hardline independence figure. Okay, so there's the way that the KMT dealt with this issue in their TV ads. What about our second case, the Min of the DUP? Again, there was much less talk of the China threat than I expected. Perhaps the bigger stressed issue was democratization and the role that the Democratic Progressive Party has in Taiwan's democratic reform. So you can see how the KMT and the DUP are trying to take credit for democratization. And in this ad, Chen Shui-bian, who at this point in time is the Taipei mayor and future president, talks about why voters should reward the DUP in this election, talking about what the DUP has achieved or done since its establishment in 1986. For example, the ad notes how they oppose the old parliamentarians revising the Constitution. And here he calls the old parliamentarians the old thieves. This is referring to Taiwan's parliamentarians that are elected in Taiwan in 1947, 1948, who stay in office until 1991, 1992. And the ad also reminds voters that the DUP plays a key role in the call for direct presidential elections. In other words, until about 1993, the KMT opposed the idea of direct presidential elections. So DUP is trying to claim credit for democratization. And we have a kind of a montage of key DUP figures with Peng Mingmin, the presidential candidate, in the middle. Peng, of course, is a former political dissident who spent decades in exile as a result of his political activism. So Chen is arguing that voters should reward the DUP for their sacrifices for Taiwan's democracy. And it ends asking voters not to let the DP disappear because at this point in time, Peng is way behind Li in the polls. And actually, a lot of DP politicians didn't fully support Peng's campaign because they thought he was too extreme. But of course, there were some ads where we do see some reference to China and the China threat from the DP. Overall, the DP looks more moderate than 1991, but still more radical than just a few months ago when Taiwan held parliamentary elections in December 1995. Here we have a couple of screenshot examples. We have a DUP-run anti-annexation rally. We can see the headband is opposing annexation. And here we have the Peng Mingmin and Xie Jiangting's, the DP's election banner, peace, dignity, Taiwan president. So it's the Taiwan president rather than the Republic of China president. Okay, but the ad that talks the most about the China issue is one called Old Li Tours the Republic of China. So this is a DP ad that's making fun of the KMT's insistence on sticking to the Republic of China. If you've ever seen a Republic of China map, you might notice that it looks quite different from a People's Republic of China map. So this is called Old Li Tours the Republic of China. And here we have this cartoon is of Li Donghui saying, I'm going to take everyone on a tour of the Republic of China, which of course is, if you look at the official maps, is surprisingly strangely shaped and surprisingly large. And in this cartoon ad, we see him unsuccessfully go to a number of places in the official Republic of China. He goes to India and Vietnam and Mongolia, and every place he gets chased away or beaten up. The same happens when he goes to Russia, where he places his flag on Red Square. And Boris Yeltsin, who of course was the Russian president at the time, machine guns him. And then he takes his ROC flag to the next place, to Tiananmen Square. But again, he gets chased away. And then we see Jiang Zemin appearing with the PRC flag. And then that means the only place he's got left of the Republic of China is Taiwan. But even here, he's not necessarily the master. We see the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Hall, and Chiang Kai-shek shouts out, "Long live the Republic of China." And then the moral of this ad is that we need to be sure about what is the country's territory, that the sovereignty of Taiwan is on the main island of Taiwan, Penghu, Jinmen, and the offshore islands. So we shouldn't have this continue with this illusion that the Republic of China still exists. So it's quite a clear pro-independence position compared to Lee's kind of vague middle of the road position. And the final thing I would add here is that when I was doing my interviews in 2001 and talking about this election, a number of DPP politicians argued that actually Peng wasn't in line with the DPP party. Some politicians argued that actually many independent supporters in 1996 voted voted for Lee and the KMT rather than for the official DPP candidate, who they saw as being too extreme. And this is quite a nice quote from a veteran DPP politician. And he argued that instead of saying the DPP did badly that year in 1996, we could say the DPP did very well, because the real DPP party chairman was Lee Donghui, and the actual DPP chairman was elected president. So this was quite a interesting type of analysis, because Peng was quite out of step with the mainstream of the party. Okay, and now that brings me then to our two sets of KMT rebel candidates that have both previously held very high government or party positions. The first one was Chen Liuan and Wang Qingfeng. Wang Qingfeng, I should say, her background was in Taiwan's feminist movement. And there were two really big themes in Chen Liuan and Wang Qingfeng's campaign. And don't forget, these were the biggest spenders in this campaign. The first one was the underprivileged in Taiwan society. So we see a lot of images of things like homelessness, the disabled, and the argument was that although we have democracy, it's not delivering for the ordinary worker. Another big theme was that the president should be above party politics. And so here we have the president is above party politics, Wang Qifeng and Chen Liuan. One of the ways this was symbolized was through the three political parties cutting up a cake and making a mess of Taiwan. So the green is the DPP, blue is the KMT, and yellow is for the new party, the third largest party in Taiwan at this point in time. We only really saw Chen Liuan and Wang Qingfeng talking about China right at the end. So this is not very clear, but this is from the pre-voting day rally of Chen and Wang. And we have the slogan saying that we should reject endorsing war. So in other words, it's equating the KMT and Lee with war with China. Okay, the set of candidates that talks the most about China in the TV ads of 1996 is the third place candidates, Lin Yagang and Hao Bo-chun. We see this in this ad, where we see a young child playing with building blocks. And in the background, there's a news report on the Chinese military exercises. And the young girl asked her parents, will the missiles hit our home? The father replied, saying, "Don't worry, Mummy and Daddy will protect you." And this is actually quite a common strategy, using children in ads. The KMT does this very often. But just as the father is saying, "Don't worry," to his daughter, he's thinking to himself, who will protect us if war breaks out? And then we shift to the rebel KMT candidate, Liang Gang. He explains how with me, so long as I win, you'll be safe with me. He doesn't really tell us how, but he will do in another ad. In another ad called the Ideals ad, we see how Lin and Hao frame this election. Here we have a clip from their press conference where they announce that they're going to stand. Announcing they're going to stand is quite controversial because they're lifelong KMT members. So standing means they're going to be expelled. And in this press conference, they frame the election as a choice between democracy and dictatorship. So they're associating Lee with dictatorship, and between war and peace. They follow a very similar line to the Chinese criticism of Li Donghui, arguing that his kind of separatist rhetoric or pro-independence rhetoric has crossed Chinese red lines. So for them, Li is the cause of these cross-strait tensions, just as the PRC is stating. We see the message again in the peace ad by Lin and Hao. Earlier, we saw how the KMT was celebrating the international breakthroughs, going to the US in June of 1995. But for Lin and Hao, the reading is very different. They argued that this has crossed the PRC's red lines. And this is why we have the first set of military exercises in July of 1995. And these have continued through until March of 1996. And they also tell voters that they're paying a price for this international diplomacy, with the stock market crashing right after these first set of military exercises. In another ad, they mentioned the immigration wave. At this point in time, one of my jobs in Taiwan was working at an immigration company, training people to pass the interviews to go to New Zealand, Canada, and Australia. The company did very good business at this point in time, 95, 96, 90, 97. And we also see, to give further evidence, we have a Chinese expert explaining how Li has caused the crisis. And then we have Liang Gang talking about how he's going to diffuse tensions by rejecting separatism. Okay, and here we have the Lin Hao badge, and their kind of slogan is, "If you choose Lin and Hao, everyone will be fine." New leadership, new order, and new hope. Now, usually in Taiwan's elections, the KMT would attack the DPP, would attack the second largest or the largest opposition party. And previously, this was very common. But 1996 is an exception. The KMT didn't attack Pengmin and the DPP much in this election. Instead, they attack these rebel candidates. And in one of the KMT's newspaper ads, they make fun of the Lin and Hao's slogan. New leadership equals Jiang Zemin, who at this point is the Chinese president. New order, People's Liberation Party. People's Liberation Army. New hope, to be unified, to be taken over by China. So for the KMT is trying to frame Lin and Hao as defeatists, pro-unification defeatists. Okay, and here we have, so the new party didn't have a presidential candidate, but it supported Lin and Hao. And here we have a couple of quotes from one of their ads. Don't let our children become Taiwan independentists cannon fodder. To balance Li's independence, so they're calling Li independence, and the DP's rapid independence, you can only rely on the new party. Okay, so that's what was happening in 1996. How have things changed 30 years later? So Taiwan has its last national elections in January of 2024. And at this point, we had three candidates. Lai Ching-te of the DDP, Hou You-yi of the KMT, and we had Ko Wen-je of the Taiwan People's Party. There's quite a relatively new party that's established in 2019. So I did something similar. I took a look at what the main parties, how they spoke about China in 2024. And here we have the KMT candidate explaining his position. He says, I oppose independence, but I also oppose one country, two systems, which is the PRC model for unification. Additionally, we have the KMT again calling for cross-strait economic ties, talking about the benefits of economic integration, talking about reviving the Cross-Strait Services Trade Agreement, which was a very big agreement that created a huge backlash in Taiwan in 2014. But for the KMT, economic integration is the answer to Taiwan's economic problems. And this is starkly different to what the KMT was arguing 3 decades earlier. Back in 1996, Li Denghui was discouraging investment with China, talking about the risks of over-dependence on China. So the KMT has moved quite significantly. Back in 1996, the KMT wasn't attacking independence. Another ad shows a number of KMT leaders, and basically what they're doing is blaming the DUP for Chinese military exercises and the risk of war in 2024. And towards the end of this ad, we see the KMT vice president and presidential candidates making a commitment to take Taiwan away from a war. So 3 decades later, again, we see the election framed the choice between war and peace. So according to the KMT in 2024, if the DP wins, we have war, and if the KMT wins, we have peace. So again, very different from the KMT's position in 1996 of taking a strong stand against China. What about the DUP? How has it changed almost 3 decades later? Well, many of the DP's goals have been achieved by this stage. In 2024, the DP has already been in power for 8 years. And the DP is warning about the dangers of economic integration or economic overdependence on China, warning that if Han Kuo-yu becomes the president of the parliament, that we'll go back to over-relying on China. So here the narrator reminds us of the way that when Han Kuo-yu went to Hong Kong in 2019, he met the Hong Kong special executive, Carrie Lam, and went to the PRC's office in Hong Kong, in the background to the Hong Kong pro-democracy protests. So they're warning voters that you can't trust the KMT. They're going to betray Taiwan to China. And they also remind voters that if the KMT comes back to power, we're going to have to go back in time and redo the Sunflower Movement. So just a reminder, in 2014, Taiwan has a student and civil society occupation of its parliament. And they occupy parliament for 3 weeks against a China trade deal. And they're actually successful, which my students at SOAS are always very impressed about. That the idea of UK university students occupying Parliament for 3 weeks and not getting kicked out, and changing the government's foreign policy is quite a miraculous achievement. So they're warning that if the KMT comes back to power, we're going to have to do this all over again and occupy and redo the Sunflower Movement. So this means then that the DP looks more like the KMT 30 years ago. In other words, warning of the risks of being too close economically to China. The DP does also claim that we'll give you a guarantee of peace. So we won't be too radical in what we do when it comes to our foreign policy. So let me then just wrap up with a couple of concluding points. If we go back to the 1990s and the Taiwan's party system during that era, the overall trend was actually convergent. In other words, the political parties were moving towards the median voter. So they're moving towards the center of the political spectrum. And maybe 1996 for the DUP was an exception, but the overall trend is convergent. In contrast, after 2000, the trend is more divergent. For example, the New Party, the third largest party in the 1990s, is basically a People's Republic of China spokesperson. It's a very clear, hardline pro-unification party. The KMT has also moved away from Lee's position of 1996, putting a lot of stress on the dangers of independence and stressing the benefits of economic integration. We saw that in those 2024 ads, and it's moved even more radical since it changed its party chair in autumn of 2025. For example, the KMT party chair has been to China recently to meet with Xi Jinping. So in many ways, the KMT today is more like the new party of 3 decades ago. And what about the DUP, the current ruling party in Taiwan? It's definitely more moderate than 3 decades ago, or even more moderate than when the first DUP presidency of 2000 to 2008. It's more of a status quo party that's not afraid to talk about the Republic of China. It's fairly close to Li Denghui's position in the late 1990s, warning of the risks of over-dependence on China. So going back then, comparing now and then, I think is a really interesting experience. I really enjoyed going back to look at these pieces of political communication I hadn't looked at for 20 years. But it does really show the way that Taiwan's party system has changed over the last 3 decades. And that's where I'm going to finish.